W.B. Yeats's poem "Sailing to Byzantium" was published in 1928. The poem explores the dichotomies between age and youth, sensuality and spirituality. The speaker in this poem is an aged man who comes to the realization that youth and the sensual life are no longer an option for him, and he commences on a spiritual journey to the ideal world of Byzantium. Yeats felt that the civilization of Byzantium represented a zenith in art spirituality. Byzantium symbolizes a place where the spiritless can journey in order to seek out the spiritual. In Byzantium, the speaker is able to discard the natural element of his body in favor of the immortal, spiritual element of his soul. The poem tells us about a man who, feeling past his prime, sails off to a land where emphasis is not on the physical achievements of a person, which he finds more and more difficult for his aging body. To represent this land of the mind, Yeats uses Byzantium, which was the eastern half of the Roman Empire, from 476 to 1453, surviving the fall of Rome by 1,000 years. Sailing to Byzantium is composed of 4 8-line stanzas called Ottava Rima. They use an AB, AB, P, AB, AB, CC rhyme scheme. The poem also uses the literary device alliteration. Ottava Rima is an 8-line stanza which often uses the iambic pentameter form of meter. Let's see the summary of the poem. In the opening stanza, it introduces a world of youth and sensuality. The conflict of the poem is addressed when the speaker distances himself from this world by stating that is no country for old men. The speaker feels alien in this natural youthful landscape. The image of the birds, often a symbol for the soul, are described as dying generations. Their songs are not immortal and thus they are aligned with the natural world. In lines 4 to 6, the speaker continues his description of the natural world with images of fertility. Salmon falls and mackerel crowded seas are both images of abundance and fertility. Yeats's salmon image is particularly interesting because it suggests both life in abundance or the natural world as well as the journey towards death or the spiritual world. Each year, salmon swim arduously upstream in order to reach a place to reproduce. In doing so, they both work with and against nature. Reproduction is natural, but swimming upstream is an act that goes against nature. The motion itself is much like flying, and one is brought back to the idea of the body traveling towards the soul. The rhyming couplet at the end of this stanza emphasizes the conflict of the poem. Youth, caught in the sensual music of the natural world, overlooks the imposing, immortal aspects of art and intellect. The second stanza introduces the world of the speaker as very different from the country of the previous stanza. An elderly man is described as a scarecrow. This bird image is interesting because it both describes the man physically and also contributes to the description of the spiritual in the natural world. While youth is represented by singing birds, age is shown by a pathetic scarecrow. The scarecrow image is transformed into the soul with another motion similar to flight. The clapping of hands and singing evokes more bird imagery, but this is associated with spiritual world. In lines 13 to 16, the speaker concludes that only in an ideal environment like Byzantium can he learn the songs of the soul. The speaker elevates Byzantium to a holy city, thus deeming it appropriate in the poem to be the center of the spiritual world. In Byzantium, the speaker addresses the sages of Byzantium, whose images are enclosed inside a holy fire, represented in a gold mosaic. This also is disguised bird image. The sages may remind the reader of the phoenix, an ancient mythical bird bird, whose body is consumed by fire only to be reborn from its own ashes. In lines 19 and 20, the speaker asks the sages to make him immortal like the glorious works of art in Byzantium. For this to occur, his body or natural element must be destroyed. In the next two lines, the speaker's heart, the home of his once youthful passions, is consumed by a cleansing fire along with his body, which is described as a dying animal. Without the body, his soul, like the sages, is held in the artifice of eternity. In lines 25 through 29, the speaker renounces the natural world and chooses to recreate himself in the form of an immortal golden bird. The bird symbolizes the soul and it sings much like the natural birds in the first stanza. But unlike those birds, the golden bird, which exemplifies the art and beauty of Indian culture, is immortal. Placed in a golden tree, the speaker has now completely transformed himself into a work of art, unable to decay. In the first stanza, the birds of the natural world sing of whatever is begotten, born, and dies, and also die themselves at the hands of nature. In the ideal world, the speaker sings of what is past or passing or to come, thereby indicating his immortality. The motifs in the poem include images of birds singing, gold, and fire. All these evoke the theme of immortality. Since the poem examines the dichotomy of youth and age, a way to bridge this conflict is through immortality. The first stanza of the poem examines the natural or sensual world, while the second stanza explores the world of spirituality. These two stanzas set up the conflict of the poem. In the third stanza, the speaker reaches Byzantium. Here, the creation through fire of a golden bird intertwines the two worlds. The body is no longer natural but is composed of gold, a more beautiful element and one that will not decay. One of the central ideas in the poem is how time affects all living things, making them slow down and lose their natural stamina and enthusiasm. The poem also notes how humans gain mental powers as physical ability slips away. The imagery used in the first stanza is mostly suggestive of reproduction. Yeats uses reproductive imagery as the most powerful symbol of youth. Once his point is established, he goes on to represent the slowing of age with more subtle imagery, a tattered coat on a stick, studying of monuments to replace singing, and so on. The point is to establish that the benefits of being young are for the young, and the aged have to establish other values for themselves. At the end of the first stanza, he makes a reference to unaging intellect. By giving equal balance to both early and late life, Yeats is looking at the effects of time from a broader perspective. He avoids the temptation to praise old age just because he is old. When the poem refers to the artifice of eternity, it is using the word art to mean roughly the same thing that we mean by the word art, a product created by the human mind. In modern society, artificiality has come to have a negative meaning, as we can see most clearly in the pride that some commercial products take in announcing that they have no artificial ingredients. We need to remember, for the sake of reading this poem, that there is also good reason to be proud of the ability to think of, design, and then create something that is not provided to us by nature. A tree is a thing that is found in the world, but an artistic work such as a painting of a tree is something that could not exist except for the power of the human mind. In the last stanza, Yeats gives a similar example, but instead of a tree, he uses a bird made of gold, which will never slow down, never become weak, and never die. Critics have mentioned that this might be a poor example for Yeats to use because even though it is created by man, the gold bird is still modeled after a thing of nature, contradicting the line, "I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing." One reason why our modern sensibilities, superficiality, have come to the opposite of Yeats is that in the time between when he wrote and now, natural objects have become so scarce and unnatural objects so overwhelming. We live in a world of simulated wood grain, silk flowers, and landscaping. We see more birds on the television screen than in the sky. It is hard for us to be moved by artifice as an achievement.